Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been going deep on all sorts of supply chain topics, and
Yep.
today we're going to tackle one that I think we've all felt pretty acutely, especially lately, the bullwhip effect.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
that thing where like a small change in customer demand, it can end up leading to these like massive inventory swings as you go further up the chain.
It's like those ripples, but instead of kind of fading away, they get bigger, like way bigger.
Yeah.
As you go further out, like, think about cracking a whip. You just give it a little flick of the wrist, but then at the end, oh man, you get this huge wave.
And I feel like we've all been seeing this play out, in the real world.
Absolutely.
Think about the empty shelves during the pandemic or, more recently, all the semiconductor shortages and everything. And these kinds of disruptions, I think they really show the real world consequences of this bullwhip effect, especially for folks like you who are, right there on the front lines dealing with this stuff every day.
Yeah, for sure.
So to help us navigate this topic, we're going to use the Wikipedia article on the bullwhip effect, which does a pretty good job of breaking it down.
Yeah.
Looks at the causes, the consequences, and it gets into some solutions too, which we'll definitely want to explore.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the first things that jumped out at me was how the article, it dives right into these different causes, and it talks about both behavioral and operational factors.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, the focus was really on people.
Yeah.
Human behavior, making maybe irrational decisions about ordering or overreacting to just a little fluctuation. But, research has come a long way. And what we've started to realize is that the way the supply chain itself is structured, that plays a big role too.
So it's not just about blaming people for making bad decisions.
Right.
It's about understanding, the systems that actually amplify those decisions.
Exactly. Yeah. And one of the key behavioral causes that I find really interesting is this idea of what they call underestimation of the pipeline.
Okay.
Basically, it's about how people in the supply chain, they often misjudge just how long it actually takes for changes in demand to actually impact their partners further up the chain. So, imagine a retailer, they see a little bit of a dip in demand.
Okay.
Maybe they decide, okay, we'll hold off on our next order. But then, by the time the wholesaler sees that, it might already be, a while later, and it looks like a way bigger problem than it really is.
Right.
And, that can lead to them overreacting, maybe overstocking.
Yeah.
And then that kind of creates this this chain reaction of over-ordering and all these inflated demand signals.
So it's like even a small delay in information, it can trigger like a much bigger issue down the line.
Absolutely.
The article also mentions this idea of base stock policies.
Yeah.
As a potential contributor. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so base stock policies, they're a type of inventory management system, and the basic idea is that, you want to have a certain level of safety stock on hand.
Yeah.
But the problem is when those policies, when they're not used properly, maybe the safety stock level is set too high or it's getting adjusted too often. Well, that can actually make the bullwhip effect even worse.
Okay.
It's kind of like you're overcompensating for every little wobble, and that just creates more instability.
So it's not just about, having safety stock. It's about having the right amount and managing it effectively.
Exactly.
And then you've also got, I imagine panic ordering comes into play here too, especially, when things are feeling uncertain.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's a big one when folks in the supply chain, they start to get worried about potential shortages. They often just, kind of resort to placing these huge orders,
Yeah.
Just in case. And that just distorts the demand signal even more.
Yeah, totally. So we've got these behavioral causes,
Right.
misjudging information, maybe misusing those inventory policies, and then just that human tendency to overreact when things feel uncertain.
Yeah.
But the article also talks about operational causes. So what are some of the key ones there?
Yeah. So one of the big ones that I've seen is demand forecast updating.
Okay.
Basically, what happens is, each company in the supply chain, they usually add a little bit of safety stock to their order.
Right, to be safe.
Yeah, makes sense, right? But the problem is all that extra just in case inventory, at each stage, it adds up, and further up the chain, you get these way bigger swings.
It's almost like that game of telephone
Right.
where the message gets a little more distorted with each whisper along the way.
Exactly. Exactly.
So what can companies do about that? I mean, should they just stop using safety stock altogether?
No, no, not necessarily. It's more about, having better visibility and actually collaborating on the demand forecasting
Okay.
instead of, each company kind of adding their own little buffer. What if they all shared their data in real time and worked together to come up with a more accurate and unified forecast?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense in theory, but sharing data across different companies, that can be a little tricky.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
There's a lot of hesitation there.
Definitely. But I think the benefits can be huge,
Yeah.
And one example that the article talks about is Walmart.
Okay.
Their distribution system, it's often held up as a good example of information sharing done right.
Huh.
Their stores, they send point of sale data back to headquarters multiple times a day.
Yeah.
So everyone in the supply chain, they have a really clear picture of what's actually happening, with customer demand.
So it's not just about having the technology in place. It's about building that culture of transparency and trust.
That's a big part of it.
Yeah, yeah, and that shared understanding. It seems like that's really crucial to kind of minimize those wild swings.
Absolutely.
The article also mentions order batching.
Mm-hmm.
And I've definitely seen this firsthand, where companies they'll kind of accumulate all their demand and then place these really large infrequent orders,
Yeah.
to try and save on costs.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense from their perspective, just trying to
Yeah.
minimize their own costs, but the problem is that creates these artificial spikes in demand,
Mm-hmm.
and then everyone upstream, it's really hard for them to get an accurate read on what customers actually want.
Yeah, imagine, if you're a supplier and you get this massive order one week and then nothing for like 3 weeks.
Right, exactly. It makes planning a nightmare.
It's got to be so hard to kind of plan your production and manage your inventory when you've got that level of variability.
Yeah, it's like trying to sail a ship through, really choppy water. You never know which way the next wave's going to hit you.
You're just getting tossed around.
Yeah.
Are there any other operational factors that we should be aware of?
Yeah, we should definitely talk about price fluctuations.
There.
A lot of times sales and discounts, they're seen as a way to boost sales.
Right, yeah.
But they can really mess things up for the supply chain.
Oh, yeah, no, I remember one time we had this big promotion for a new product, and it led to this huge surge in orders.
Mm-hmm.
But then as soon as the promotion ended, it was like, bam, everything just dropped off.
Right.
We were stuck with all this extra inventory in the warehouse, and we couldn't adjust production fast enough to kind of keep up with that swinging demand. It was a mess.
Yeah, that sounds like a classic bullwhip effect situation. And what happens is those sales and discounts, they basically encourage people to buy way more than they normally would. So you get these sudden peaks and then these lulls when everyone's stocked up, and it just makes it really hard to forecast accurately.
So you've got customers stocking up during the sale,
Yeah.
You've got retailers trying to manage all that inventory, and then the manufacturers, they're trying to like scramble to keep up with these unpredictable swings.
Right.
It's no wonder this bullwhip effect can be so disruptive.
Yeah, and then on top of that, you also have this thing called rationing in gaming. Right. Basically what happens is during those times of really high demand, retailers will sometimes try to limit how much people can order.
Okay, to make sure there's enough to go around.
Right, exactly. But then the buyers, they know this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So they start inflating their orders to try and get more than, their fair share.
So instead of smoothing out the demand, it actually makes it worse.
Yeah.
Because everybody's over ordering to try and compensate.
Exactly. And it just creates this vicious cycle that just keeps distorting the demand signal and making things more and more uncertain.
This has been really insightful.
Yeah.
I think we've uncovered a lot of those behavioral and operational causes that contribute to this whole bullwhip effect. And now that we've kind of dug into the problem,
Mm-hmm.
I think next we need to shift gears and look at the consequences. So in part 2, we'll delve deeper into the real world impacts of this phenomenon, and then in part 3 we'll we'll explore some of those practical solutions that folks like you can actually implement to try and mitigate this whole thing.
Sounds good.
We'll be back in a flash.
So welcome back. Now that we've kind of gone through some of the root causes of this bullwhip effect, I think it's time to shift gears a little bit and look at some of the consequences.
Yeah, that's what I'm really curious about. What are the actual, like, tangible impacts that this has on businesses, especially, in these complex global supply chains we're dealing with today?
Well, one of the most, I guess, obvious ones is this idea of inefficient production or excessive inventory.
Yeah.
So, companies that are further up the chain, they see those inflated demand signals that we talked about, and they often end up, producing way too much stuff, or they overstock their warehouses,
Right.
and that leads to all sorts of problems like wasted resources, higher storage costs, and even the risk that some of that stuff becomes obsolete, especially if it has a short shelf life.
Yeah, and in this day and age where everyone's so focused on efficiency and cutting costs, that's a big deal.
Oh, absolutely. And then there's, kind of the irony of it all is that even with all that extra safety stock, the bullwhip effect can still lead to stockouts and just bad customer service.
Oh, wow. See, that seems a little counterintuitive to me. I thought the whole point of having extra inventory was to prevent those kinds of problems.
Right, you would think so, but what happens is those amplified swings in demand, they can create situations where companies have, too much of one product and not enough of another.
Uh,
So, maybe there's this sudden surge in demand for product A,
okay.
and they completely sell out even though their warehouse is overflowing with product B.
Right, right.
And that leads to delays, back orders, and ultimately just a bunch of unhappy customers.
And we all know that unhappy customers are never a good thing. They might take their business elsewhere. They might leave bad reviews online. It can really hurt your brand reputation.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And
Are there any other um, consequences that we should be thinking about?
yeah, I mean, the financial impacts can be, pretty significant too.
Right.
If your customer service suffers, you might lose sales, you might damage your reputation, and you could even face contractual penalties if you can't meet those delivery deadlines.
Right, right.
And then, internally, there's the cost of trying to manage a workforce that's constantly fluctuating to try and keep up with that unpredictable demand.
Yeah, it sounds like it's kind of a domino effect. One problem leads to another, and pretty soon you've got this whole cascade of negative outcomes that are really hard to come back from.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And, the COVID-19 pandemic, that was unfortunately a very real and kind of stark example of all of this. Remember, those early days when everyone was panic buying toilet paper and masks and hand sanitizer?
Oh yeah, I think we all have some pretty vivid memories of those empty shelves.
Right.
It was kind of a wake up call for a lot of people, myself included, to see just how vulnerable our supply chains really are.
Yeah, and those shortages, that was a textbook example of the bullwhip effect in action. You
Hmm.
had this sudden surge in demand driven by, fear and uncertainty, and then people started hoarding stuff, which of course just made the demand signal even stronger further up the chain.
Yeah, you can
And
imagine.
manufacturers and suppliers, they couldn't keep up, and it led to those widespread shortages and delays that we all experienced.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that this bullwhip effect isn't just some theoretical concept.
Mhm.
It has very real consequences for businesses and consumers alike.
Mm.
So knowing all this, what can we do about it? And thankfully, the Wikipedia article it does outline some countermeasures that can help to mitigate the bullwhip effect.
Yeah, and that's the good news.
Yeah.
There are actually things that companies can do to try and dampen those fluctuations and create a more stable and resilient supply chain.
And for supply chain professionals,
Yeah.
understanding and applying these strategies, that's more crucial now than ever, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So let's dive into those solutions in this repeater. Part 3 of this deep dive will explore some practical strategies that can actually help you build a more robust and resilient supply chain. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the deep dive. So we've talked about the causes of the bullwhip effect, the consequences, and now I think the big question is, what can supply chain professionals like you actually do to kind of mitigate this challenge and build more resilient systems?
Well, there are a bunch of strategies, but I think one of the most effective is information sharing.
Okay.
Transparency is really key here. When when everybody in the supply chain, they have access to good data, accurate data, and they have it in real time,
Yeah.
that reduces a lot of uncertainty and it lets people make, smarter decisions.
So instead of kind of operating in these silos, it's more about creating this collaborative ecosystem where everyone's connected.
Exactly. Yeah, but I know, a lot of companies they're hesitant to share sensitive data, especially with their competitors.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's always a concern.
It is, but think about it this way. The bullwhip effect itself, that's a much bigger risk.
Right.
When everyone can see, what the actual demand is, what the inventory levels are, it makes it much less likely that people are going to overreact or resort to panic ordering.
So the benefits of collaboration,
Mhm.
they kind of outweigh those perceived risks of sharing information.
Yeah, in most cases I would say so. And it's not just about the data itself, it's also about building, trust and open communication with your partners in the supply chain.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely.
And the article mentions Walmart as a really good example of this.
Yeah, I was gonna say their distribution system is often held up as kind of the gold standard for information sharing. So what is it about their system that makes it so effective?
Well, they do a really good job of capturing and sharing data in real time.
Okay.
So their stores, they send point of sale data back to headquarters multiple times a day.
Route.
So everyone in the supply chain, from the distributors to the suppliers, they can see exactly what's selling and adjust their plans accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if you were a supplier and you could see, exactly how much of your product was being sold in every Walmart store across the country.
Right.
Uh,
Exactly.
I mean, that would be incredibly valuable. You could tweak your production schedules, you could optimize your inventory, you could even start to anticipate future demand.
Exactly. And that level of visibility, it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it.
Yeah.
And it really reduces the risk of those, costly inventory swings that we talked about.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So another tool that the article mentions is order smoothing.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that term thrown around, but I'm not entirely sure I understand how it works in practice.
So basically, it's about creating a more consistent flow of orders throughout the supply chain.
Oh.
Instead of placing these huge, infrequent orders that create these artificial spikes in demand,
Yeah.
companies can switch to placing smaller, more regular orders.
Okay, so instead of, putting in this massive order every quarter, you might spread it out over, weekly or biweekly orders.
Right, exactly, and that can really help suppliers with their planning.
Yeah, yeah, it would give them a much more stable, kind of a stable picture of what to expect. But wouldn't that wouldn't that increase, shipping costs and make the logistics a lot more complicated?
It could, yeah. So it's important to kind of weigh the benefits of order smoothing against, those potential increases in your operational costs.
Right.
It might not be the right solution for every company or every product, but in a lot of cases, those benefit, reduced inventory swings, better forecasting accuracy. Those can outweigh the extra logistical costs.
So it's about, finding that right balance for your particular situation.
Exactly.
What are some other strategies that companies can look at to kind of combat this bullwhip effect?
Well, the article mentions a few others that are worth exploring. One is vendor managed inventory, or VMI.
Oh, VMI. Yeah, I've heard that term, but could you remind me how that works?
Yeah, so in a VMI system, the supplier, they actually take on the responsibility for managing the buyer's inventory.
Okay.
They have access to the buyer's inventory data, and they can replenish stock automatically, so it makes for a much smoother flow of goods.
So it's like having a co-pilot for your inventory management.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And it sounds like that could really reduce a lot of that, back and forth communication and the potential for misinterpretation.
Yeah, absolutely. And VMI can be really effective for products that have, pretty stable demand patterns
Mhm.
and where the supplier and the buyer, they have a, strong relationship.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about just-in-time replenishment, or JIT?
Yeah, so JAT, that's all about minimizing your inventory levels by only receiving goods when you actually need them for production.
Okay.
It requires really close coordination with your suppliers, and it can be, a little tricky to implement,
Yeah.
but it has the potential to, really cut down on waste and make things a lot more efficient.
So it sounds like JIT is really all about timing. Making sure that those deliveries are arriving exactly when you need them to keep production running smoothly.
Exactly. But the challenge with JIT is that you really need to have reliable suppliers.
You're
You
right.
know, they have to be able to deliver on time every time, because if there are any disruptions in the supply chain, that can throw the whole system off.
Yeah, right.
And it's not just about the supplier reliability. You also need really good demand forecasting, and
Yeah.
and you need a production system that's flexible enough to adapt to changes quickly.
So JIT it's not for the faint of heart.
No, it takes a lot of, trust and coordination across the entire supply chain.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it. Uh, the article also mentions demand-driven MRP,
Hmm.
which is a planning system that focuses more on actual customer demand,
Yeah.
rather than relying on forecasts.
Yeah, so demand-driven MRP, it's all about being responsive to
Sure.
those market changes and adjusting your production accordingly.
So instead of using those kind of static forecasts, you're you're constantly adapting based on the latest data that you're seeing.
Right, exactly. So it's about building a more agile and adaptable planning system that can handle those inevitable fluctuations in customer demand.
So we've talked about, information sharing, order smoothing, VMI, JIT, demand-driven MRP. It seems like there are a lot of different options out there, but maybe there's no single magic bullet, right?
That's right. Yeah. The key takeaway here is that you really need to understand, what are the root causes of the bullwhip effect within your specific supply chain.
Yeah.
And once you identify those particular challenges, then you can start to put together a mix of solutions that addresses those specific needs.
So it's like a doctor diagnosing a patient. You have to figure out what's wrong before you can prescribe the right treatment. I like that analogy. So what would you say is the most important thing for supply chain professionals to keep in mind when it comes to this whole bullwhip effect?
I think it's important to remember that the bullwhip effect is, it's a complex challenge, but it's not impossible to overcome.
Right.
By understanding how it works and implementing the right combination of solutions, companies can actually build supply chains that are more efficient, more responsive, more resilient, and they can withstand even the toughest market conditions.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about, right? Building supply chains that can adapt and thrive no matter what challenges come their way. So, well, thank you so much for joining us on the deep dive for this exploration of the bullwhip effect. We hope this has given you some actionable insights to help you navigate this complex world of modern supply chains.
It's been a pleasure.
And to all of you listening out there, keep those supply chains flowing smoothly, and remember, information is power. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive into the fascinating world of supply chains. Until then, keep learning, keep innovating, and keep those whips in check.